Okay, let's go to the last thing I want to cover today. The reason for the title of this video and bringing it all the way back to climate change. Collapse of civilization is the most likely outcome. And the date on this is today. This is from today. This is said by the top climate scientists. I think I just read something just like this a couple weeks ago, right? Am I wrong? Australia's top climate scientists say we are already deep into the trajectory towards collapse of civilization. I feel like I read this article already, but I'll read it again. I'll read. I mean, because if I didn't read this 2 weeks ago, I read this 3 months ago, or 6 months ago, or a year ago, or 2 years ago. Whether it's this study or another study, or this group of scientists or another group of scientists, they all come out and go, guys, problems. Australia's top climate scientists say we are already deep into the trajectory towards collapse of civilization, which may now be inevitable because 9 of the 15 known global climate tipping points that regulate the state of the planet have been activated. Australian National University Emeritus Professor Will Steffen told Voice of Action that there was already a chance we have triggered a global tipping cascade that would take us to a less habitable hothouse Earth, quote unquote, climate, regardless of whether we reduced emissions. I'm going to read that again, regardless of whether we reduced emissions. Steffen says it would take 30 years at best, more likely 40 to 60 years to transition to net zero emissions. But when it comes to tipping points such as Arctic sea ice, we could have already run out of time. Evidence shows we will also lose control of the tipping points for the Amazon rainforest, the West Antarctic ice sheet, and the Greenland ice sheet in much less time than it's going to take us to get to net zero emissions, Steffen says. Hold on. I'm going to read that one again. Evidence shows that we will also lose control of the tipping points for the Amazon rainforest, the West Antarctic ice sheet, and the Greenland ice sheet in much less time than it's going to take us to get to net zero emissions, Steffen says. Ooh, this is about as doomy as it gets, guys. Given the momentum in both the Earth and human systems, and the growing difference between the reaction time needed to steer humanity toward a more sustainable future and the intervention time left to avert a range of catastrophes in both the physical climate system, e.g. melting of Arctic sea ice, and the biosphere, e.g. loss of the Great Barrier Reef, we are already deep into the trajectory towards collapse, said Steffen. That is, the intervention time we have left has, in many cases, shrunk to levels that are shorter than the time it would take to transition to a more sustainable system. The fact that many of the features of the Earth system that are being damaged or lost constitute tipping points that could well link to form a tipping cascade raises the ultimate question: have we already lost control of the system? Is collapse now inevitable? These are very important questions. This is not a unique view. Right? This is not one guy. This is not an outlier. We already know that many scientists have already said this. Many people have already said this. Guy McPherson, Jem Bendell, Roger Hallam, to name a few. Many people have already come to this conclusion, but every single day, more scientists come over to this line of thinking than go away from this line of thinking, right? So every single day, the more we learn about climate change or what's happening to the Earth, the more scientists go over to the side of saying, guys, big problems. This is not a unique view. Leading Stanford University biologists who were first to reveal that we are already experiencing the sixth mass extinction on Earth released new research this week showing species extinctions are accelerating in an unprecedented manner, which may be a tipping point for the collapse of human civilization. Also, in the past week, research emerged showing the world's major food baskets will experience more extreme droughts than previously forecast, with southern Australia among the worst hit globally. Stefan used the metaphor of the Titanic in one of his recent talks to describe how we may cross tipping points faster than the time it would take us to react to get our impact on the climate under control. Guess what? We just reacted. In the last 2 months, we just reacted with unanimous force. We shut down entire countries in the face of another threat. It can be done. However, people need to actually understand the problem. If the Titanic realizes that it's in trouble and it has about 5 kilometers that it needs to slow and steer the ship, but it's only 3 kilometers away from the iceberg, it's already doomed, he said. This is an existential threat to civilization. Stefan, along with some of the world's most eminent climate scientists, laid out our predicament in the starkest possible terms in a piece for the journal Nature at the end of last year. They found that 9 of the 15 known Earth tipping elements that regulate the state of the planet had been activated, and there was now scientific support for declaring a state of planetary emergency. There has been support for that, by the way, for quite a long time. These tipping points can trigger abrupt carbon release back into the atmosphere, such as the release of carbon dioxide and methane caused by the irreversible thawing of the Arctic permafrost. Guess what? That's already happening. That's happening right now. It's thawing. The permafrost is thawing. It is thawing. It's not going to refreeze anytime soon. 9 of 15 known Earth tipping points have been activated. If damaging tipping cascades can occur, and a global tipping point cannot be ruled out, then this is an existential threat to civilization, they wrote. No amount of economic cost-benefit analysis is going to help us. We need to change our approach to the climate problem. Excuse me. The evidence from tipping points alone suggests that we are in a state of planetary emergency. Both the risk and urgency of the situation are acute. Stefan is also the lead author of the heavily cited 2018 paper Trajectories of the Earth System in the Anthropocene, where he found that even if the Paris Accord target of 1.5 C to 2 C rise in temperature is met, we cannot exclude the risk that a cascade of feedbacks could push the Earth system irreversibly into a hothouse Earth pathway. Woo! Stefan is a global authority on the subject of tipping points, which are prone to sudden shifts if they get pushed hard enough by a changing climate, and could take the trajectory of the system out of human control. Further warming would become self-sustaining due to system feedbacks and their mutual interaction. Stefan describes it like a row of dominoes, and his concern is we are already at the point of no return, knocking over the first couple of dominoes, which could lead to a cascade knocking over the whole row. Some of these we think are vulnerable in the temperature range we're entering into now, said Stefan. If we get those starting to tip, we could get the whole row of dominoes tipping and take us to much hotter climate, even if we get our emissions down. Even the notoriously conservative United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has found that already with the 1.1 C of warming that we have to date, there was a moderate risk of tipping some of these, and the risk increased as the temperatures increased. Stefan believes we are committed to at least a 1.5 C temperature rise given the momentum in the economic and climate system, but we still have a shot at staying under 2 C with urgent action. Really? Do we? Do we now? Okay, well, what's the urgent action? I have an idea. Hello, Mr. Cotter, I have an idea. We shut down our economies and we shut down what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, just like we did in coronavirus. Only we do it, we give people food, money, healthcare, a way to live, a way to reorganize and reconstruct our local communities. We do all of that right away. Right away, and we prepare people for staying, locked down or localized or whatever it is. It's, for transitioning into this new lifestyle, we prepare them for that and say, look, this isn't going to be a month. This is not going to be a year, not going to be 5 years. We're going to have to do this for a while. Not only that, let's commit to taking our population numbers down. So let's agree to only have, one child, families, all the people. Let's agree to use a lot less resources, all the people, all the families, all the people. Osama number 5 up your nose with a rubber hose. Hello. Let's go back to this article. 4C would support less than 1 billion people. This is just math. Again, this is why I say that we're not going to make it to 9 or 10 billion people. We're not going to make it. I don't care what kind of technology we come up with for, maybe we feed everybody intravenously with algae that we've grown or whatever it's called, whatever we can grow in a vat, we make little cubes of it and that's what people live on in the future underground. I don't know. Probably 3C wouldn't support more than 1 billion people. Professor Hans Joachim Schellnhuber, Director Emeritus and founder of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, believes if we go much past 2C, we will quickly get to 4C anyway because of the tipping points and feedbacks, which would spell the end of human civilization. Johan Rockström, the head of one of Europe's leading research institutes, warned in 2019 that in a 4C warmer world, it would be difficult to see how we could accommodate 1 billion people or even half of that. There will be a rich minority of people who survive with modern lifestyles, no doubt, but it will be a turbulent, conflict-ridden world. So, make the decision or have the decision made for you is pretty much where we're at. Schellnhuber, one of the world's leading authorities on climate change, said that if we continue down the present path, there's a very big risk that we will just end our civilization. The human species will survive somehow, but we will destroy almost everything we have built up over the last 2,000 years. Schellnhuber said in a recent interview that the IPCC report stating we could stay below 1.5 C of warming was slightly dishonest, quote unquote, because it relies on immense negative emissions. That's called technology, pulling CO2 out of the air, which was not viable at a global scale. The IPCC report actually stated this. They stated we're going to need some technology, but we don't know what it is yet. He said 1.5C was no longer achievable if it was still possible to stay under 2C with massive changes to society. If we don't bend the emissions curve down substantially before 2030, then keeping temperatures under 2C becomes unavoidable. The carbon law, published in the journal Science in 2017, found that to hold warming below 2C, emissions would need to be cut in half between 2020 and 2030. Emissions would need to be cut in half between 2020 and 2030. Well, that's right now, guys. That's right now. Stefan told Voice of Action that the 3 main challenges to humanity, climate change, the degradation of the biosphere, and the growing inequalities between and among countries were just different facets of the same fundamental problem. This problem was the neoliberal economic system that spread across the world. This is very important. This is key. The problem was the neoliberal economic system that spread across the world through globalization, underpinning high production, high consumption lifestyles, and a religion built not around eternal life, but around eternal growth. That is just a smashing bit of writing right there, or just talking. I guess he just said this because these are quotes. A religion built not around eternal life, but around eternal growth. Let me go back. Neoliberal economic system. Let me go back. High production, high consumption lifestyles. It is becoming abundantly clear that the system, or one will say, the system is incompatible with a well-functioning Earth system at the planetary level. That is inescapably true. The system is eroding human and societal well-being, even in the wealthiest countries. And 3, collapse is the most likely outcome of the present trajectory of the current system as prophetically modeled in 1972 in the Limits to Growth work, Stephen told Voice of Action. Eternal growth is not possible. The Limits to Growth model released by the Club of Rome in 1972, I'm sure you guys have seen some of those YouTube videos about those charts and graphs and data. Looked at the interplay between food production, industry, population, non-renewable resources, and pollution. The basic findings were that you can't grow the system indefinitely, as you will cause environmental and resource issues that will ultimately cause the whole global system to collapse. It's called overshoot. ABC's This Day Tonight program covered it here, and at the time of the model's release, it accurately reproduced the historical data from 1900 to 1970. A 2008 study by Graham Turner, then a senior CSIRO research scientist, used 3 decades of real-world historical data to conclude that the Limits to Growth model's predictions were coming to pass. That was 12 years ago. 30 years of historical data compare favorably with key features of a business-as-usual scenario called the standard run scenario, which results in collapse of the global system midway through the 21st century. We are a quarter of the way through the 21st century, or approaching a quarter of the way. So, any day now. Turner ran updated figures through the model again in 2012 for another peer-reviewed paper, and again in 2014 when he had joined the University of Melbourne's Sustainable Society Institute. Data from the 40 years or so since the LTG study was completed indicates that the world is closely tracking for BAU, or business as usual scenario, Turner concluded in the 2014 paper. It is notable that there does not appear to be other economy environment models that have demonstrated such comprehensive and long-term data agreement. Turner semi-retired in 2015, but runs a small organic market garden on a rural property in the New South Wales South Coast Bega Valley. He and his wife grow most of their own food and live off-grid, powered by solar energy systems. Turner said this saved him during last summer's catastrophic bushfires as his power stayed online, but most people in the area lost power for weeks. Turner has continued tracking the data as best as possible since his last official report in 2014, and last year he helped a Harvard master's student update the data for their thesis. Turner told Voice of Action that under his modeling, the business-as-usual scenario ends up resulting in a global collapse from about now through the next decade or so. So he updated the info, or the input, and the business-as-usual scenario ends up resulting in a global collapse basically in the next decade. Any time between now and the next decade. It was difficult to predict a timeline, but Turner said he believed there's an extremely strong case that we may be in the early stages of collapse right at this moment. Vested interests and corrupt politicians, combined with a population happy to deny problems, overwhelm those that are trying to promulgate truth and facts, said Turner. Ding, ding, ding. This is good and long. I really didn't realize this was so long, guys, but this is really good. Hold on one second. It doesn't get much scarier than this, my friends. This is just data, science, evidence. This has been talked about for decades. This is science and evidence that has been known about, talked about, studied, and all of this science and all of this evidence and all of these predictions are now in line with what is happening right now. Geez, I don't know if I can read this. Hold on one second, because wait, let me see where the end is. Let's see if I can get through the rest of this. I don't know if I can. This is long. Let's go for it. It's not that long. I think I can do it. By 2030, we'll know what path we've taken. Stefan told Voice of Action that it's highly likely that by 2030 we'll know what pathway we've taken, the pathway towards sustainability, or the current pathway towards likely collapse. I think the fork in the road will come in this decade, probably not a single point in time, but as a series of events, says Stefan. Stefan told Voice of Action he believes collapse will likely not come as a dramatic global collapse, but rather as overall deterioration in many features of life, with regional collapses occurring here and there. That is exactly the way I see it as well. For example, it appears that the USA is entering a long period of decline in many aspects of its society, with a potential for a more rapid collapse in the coming decades. Oh, wow, guys. Does that look like that's happening? Samuel Alexander, a lecturer with the University of Melbourne and a recent research fellow at the Melbourne Sustainable Society Institute, told Voice of Action that the coming collapse would not be a single black or white event. With respect to civilizations, what is more likely is that we have entered a stage of what J.M. Greer calls catabolic collapse, where we face decades of ongoing crises as the existing mode of civilization deteriorates, but then recovers as governments and civil society try to respond and fix things and keep things going for a bit longer, said Alexander. Capitalism is quite good at dodging bullets and escaping temporary challenges to its legitimacy and viability, but its condition, I feel, is terminal. Alexander, who studies the economic, political, and cultural challenges of living on a planet in an age of limits, believes the future will be post-growth, post-capitalist, post-industrial in some form. The future will arrive in part by design and in part by disaster. Our challenge is to try to constitute the future through planning and community action, not have the future constitute us, said Alexander. Again, right. We either make choices or we have those choices made for us. Alexander said that it would never be too late to act sensibly, as whether we're trying to avoid or manage collapse, there's lots of work to be done. A 3-degree future is better than a 4-degree future. Maybe, I guess. Stefan believes the current U.S. mass uprisings are not a sign of collapse, but one of growing instability. Alexander said it was a sign of steam building up within a closed system. Without bold grassroots and political action, we are likely to see explosions of civil unrest increasingly as things continue to deteriorate. As economies deteriorate and as inequalities deepen, more people get disenfranchised, incentivizing resistance and, sadly, sometimes making people look for scapegoats to blame for new or intensifying hardships, e.g. the so-called alt-right, said Alexander. It's not just the alt-right. There's all kinds of groups are looking for scapegoats. Everybody's looking for a scapegoat. And some scapegoats are more culpable than others. Anyways, nice. This is a nice, lovely graph here of where the Earth might head or could head. Stabilized Earth, hothouse Earth, down she goes. Funding dried up after inconvenient truths. When Turner joined CIRO in the early 2000s, the organization was working on the Australian stocks and flows framework, a model of the economy using physical things rather than dollars. The work was funded by the Department of Immigration, but Turner says the reports, the last of which was done in 2010, were buried because the conclusions did not support high population growth. Wow. The research found the economic benefits in terms of wealth per person would be outweighed by social ills, including the impact on quality of life and the environment from resource use and pollution. The reports warned that there would be nil net flow to the Darling River, loss of habitat in animal and plant species, traffic congestion, city water deficits, and reduced biodiversity due to polluted creeks. Turner's findings went against the neoliberal orthodoxies as they challenged the notion of infinite growth on a finite planet. He said he and others pursuing similar research in stocks and flows, models of the economy, found it harder and harder to get work funded. It is no wonder, then, that the latest Breakthrough National Center for Climate Restoration report found there is no literature that synthesizes the large-scale impacts that climate change could have on Australia's economy, and no reliable snapshot of Australia's economic vulnerability to future climate warming in a regional and global context. Stephan said he hadn't received any political pressure over his work, but I probably haven't attacked the growth capitalism paradigm as directly as Graham Turner has. He says he has not hesitated to note the incompatibility of the neoliberal economic system with a stable Earth system in his talks. Man, this is about as right on the head as it gets. Our economic system is incompatible with a stable Earth system. It seems obvious that very fundamental changes are required, all the way down to core values. What do we really value in life, said Stephan. Turner said the absolutely immense changes required to deliver a sustainable future were just too hard for the vast majority of people to contemplate. Can't even sit down and think about it. And that is very true. From the most ardent climate denier on the right to the most liberal, living the good life, climate understander on the left. Turner said the absolute immense changes, I read that, you'd have to have the birth rate. You'd have to have net zero immigration. You'd have to go totally renewable energy and double efficiencies in every sector of the economy. And the really key thing is that you'd have to reduce the working week over time so that it would become half of what it is, said Turner. Wow. Does this guy sound like a Nazi? Is this guy some kind of crazed right-winger? No, he's a scientist. He's just inputting data into a model that tells you what needs to be done in order to avoid this absolute brick wall of climate catastrophe. I'm going to read this again. You'd have to have the birth rate in half, cut the birth rate in half. You'd have to have net zero immigration. You'd have to go totally renewable energy and double efficiencies in every sector of the economy. And the really key thing is you'd have to reduce the working week over time. In other words, people would have to stop doing all the things like going to work or having to go to work. And then on top of all the things that you do when you go to work and you make a bunch of money, you buy some cars, you buy some land, you buy some houses, you go on trips, you go on vacation, you go on cruises, blah, blah, boo. But that would also mean that people wouldn't have the same level of income, and it goes hand in hand with reducing household consumption, what I'm just talking about. Reducing household consumption by half. And unless you do all of those things, you don't achieve a steady state, sustainable future. And if you leave some of those things out, you've got to go even harder at the others. Turner believes it would be possible to provide for everyone's needs in a sustainable way, but we would have to live a 1950s or 1960s style lifestyle with limits such as one car and TV per household. I mean, 1950s or 1960s lifestyle is luxurious compared to 200 years ago. Luxurious compared to how the Amish live. So, if people have a problem with this, I don't know what the problem is. I don't even have a TV. I'm not planning on buying a TV anytime soon. I do have computers and such. We wouldn't be living in caves and we'd still have technology, but the rate of change would be a lot slower. I think if we all managed to live a simpler and arguably more fulfilling life, then it would be possible still with some technological advances to have a sustainable future, but it would seem that it's more likely that we are headed toward, or perhaps on the cusp of, a sort of global collapse, Turner told Voice of Action. Turner said he fears that the public at large won't take the problem seriously enough and demand change until they're actually losing their jobs or losing their life or seeing their children directly suffer. And that is, unfortunately, probably true. Potentially infinite costs of climate change. The political discourse is about getting back to growth, supported by taxpayer-subsidized fossil fuels, but evidence shows that even if the government was committed to renewable energy, green growth is just not possible at a global scale. Again, is this guy some crazed anti-humanist? Is he playing into a right-wing ideology? No, he is not. He is a scientist, inputting data and telling you what the output says. Reading the graphs and the charts and the charts and the graphs, and they tell you this. Green growth is just not possible at a global scale. God dang it. 2000, but they don't want you to know this. This is why they censored Michael Moore. That's why they took his film down. That's why they're writing article after article after article after article telling you what a lunatic Michael Moore and Jeff Gibbs are. A 2019 IMF working paper notes a growing agreement between economists and scientists that a risk of catastrophic and irreversible disaster is rising, implying potentially infinite costs of unmitigated climate change, including, in the extreme, human extinction. And look at this here, little graph. Like normal, normal, normal. Ow, ow, ow. Red, red, red. Here we are right now. Earth system moves to a new state. Severe challenge to contemporary civilization, possible collapse. We're almost done, guys. We're getting close, okay? Just wait a minute. I don't think we're almost close. You know what? I don't know if I can read this whole thing. This is just a long article. What say you guys? You want me to keep going? I'm going to stop and read some comments. Because my brain and my eyes and my mouth are a little tired. Some people can talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, but I'm not one of those people. Talking actually makes me tired. Osama number 5 says circling the drain. Going South says economic mountaintop removal. Charlie Adams says, I am so happy I found a nice bicycle yesterday. I want to trade my cars for a motorhome. Good on you. Yep. Just, take everything all the way down, right? I'm so happy. I'm so overjoyed that I haven't driven my car hardly more than a couple times a week in the last 2 months. It's been wonderful. Weed break. Let's keep going. I'm almost done. This is it's pretty heavy. It's pretty long, but whatever. What the hell? The Australian-based Breakthrough National Center. You know what? I just realized I actually do have somewhere to be soon. The Australia-based Breakthrough National Center for Climate Restoration has spent years publishing reports warning that the science shows we are headed for civilizational collapse. They stress there's no further carbon budget today for a realistic chance of staying below 2C, so there can be no further fossil fuel expansion. The breakthrough reports have been critical of the scientific community, including the IPCC, for underplaying the full risks of climate change, particularly the tipping points and existential risk. Its latest report, Fatal Calculations, takes aim at economists for failing to adequately account for costs of inaction in their models, which in turn has been used by politicians to delay action. Despite the escalating climate disasters globally, not least our bushfires, this preoccupation with the cost of action and how are we going to pay for it? And a blind eye turned to overwhelming future damage remains the dominant thinking within politics, business, and finance, the Breakthrough Report found. Because climate change is now an existential threat to human society, risk management and the calculation of potential future damages must pay disproportionate attention to the high-end extreme possibilities rather than focus on middle-of-the-spectrum probabilities. In a discussion paper released in May, titled COVID-19 Climate Lessons, Breakthrough draws parallels between climate change and the lack of preparedness for the pandemic. The world is sleepwalking towards disaster. The UN climate science and policy-making institutions are not fit for purpose and have never examined or reported on the existential risks The paper reads, there are no national or global processes to ensure that such risk assessments are undertaken or are efficacious. The World Economic Forum reports on high-end global risks, including climate disruption, once a year, and then everybody goes back to ignoring the real risks. And here are climate feedbacks. Human activity is causing temperature rises beyond the envelope of natural variability that the biosphere is built to support. Stefan said, there's only been 2 times in the last 100 million years that we have seen a spike in temperature like this. The first was when the dinosaurs were wiped out 65 million years ago. The second was another mass extinction event 56 million years ago. The last time atmospheric carbon dioxide emissions were at the current level was during the early to mid-Pliocene 3 to 4 million years ago, when temperatures were around 3°C warmer than the late 19th century and sea levels were around 25 meters higher. That's at 3°C. 3°C. Despite recent bushfires, which burnt 35 million hectares, causing 445 excess deaths from smoke and incinerated 1 billion animals, doubling Australia's annual CO2 emissions in the process, the government is refusing to commit to even modest emissions reduction targets and is pushing a gas-fired economy. It has emerged this week that the government was warned about the likelihood of severe bushfires but failed to do enough to prepare. Fire chiefs were also gagged from talking about climate change. The Great Barrier Reef this year was hit with its third mass bleaching event in 5 years. The Australian government, beholden to the fossil fuel industry and with no corruption watchdog to keep it in check, continues to resist pressure to increase its climate change commitment. Australia will not be able to meet its Paris targets without an accounting loophole. Targets which themselves are inadequate to prevent collapse. It's not just climate change that is leading us to collapse, but also the fact that nature is declining globally at rates unprecedented in human history. Around 1 million animal and plant species are now threatened with extinction, many within decades. As Stefan notes, the web of life on Earth is getting smaller and increasingly frayed. Humans thoroughly dominate the land biosphere, making up 32% of all terrestrial biomass, followed by around 65% in domesticated animals, leaving, this is important, less than 3% of vertebrate wildlife. Wild animals make up 3% of all terrestrial biomass. There has also been what's called the Great Acceleration, whereby human population and economic growth is accelerating, leading to accelerating use of resources like water and energy. This has also led to exponential growth in greenhouse gas emissions, ocean acidification, ozone depletion, surface temperatures, marine fish capture, terrestrial biosphere degradation, tropical forest loss, and domesticated land. Many countries, including parts of Australia, are running out of water and having to truck in bottled water. It is predicted that 1.8 billion people will be living in water-scarce regions by 2025. Stefan says net zero emissions by 2050 would be too late, quote unquote, and the only thing that will save us are radical solutions, committing to no new fossil fuel developments of any kind from right now, a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, and a 100% renewable energy, reaching net zero emissions by 2040. Stefan says it's much, much cheaper not to use fossil fuels in the first place than to try to capture the CO2 after the fact, as if you're fighting the second law of thermodynamics when you're trying to recapture CO2. Turner believes the Corporations Act should be rewritten so that corporations don't have more legal rights than people and are not compelled to make a profit for shareholders. Associate Professor Anitra Nelson, Honorary Principal Fellow at the University of Melbourne's Melbourne Sustainability Society Institute, advocates for degrowth policies. Advocates for degrowth policies which would reduce global consumption and production to sustainable levels. She says we're currently consuming resources as if there were 4 Earths, and if we don't change fast, we will face conditions that we can't survive under. On the current trajectory, we're possibly gone already. And if we're not, Unless we act very quickly and in very serious ways, we just can't get back into a kind of balance with nature, Nelson told Voice of Action. I do actually think we're already into collapse, and it's just likely to get worse and more quickly worse as we go. Nelson said we have to wholesale change how we live on this planet, and that includes discussions about population control, such as restrictions on the number of kids people have and even maximum income limits. There you go. Just a wild-eyed eco-Nazi. Nelson said we also need to get rid of capitalism, as fundamentally that economic system cannot survive without growth. Instead of firms competing in global market, we need to be localizing economies so that basically people are producing locally for local needs and only basic needs. This would involve having autonomous communities, yes, with substantive and direct democracy, yes, and consensus decision-making, yes. Tim Buckley, Director of Energy Finance Studies at the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis, told Voice of Action that our economic model will have to change or collapse as we are reaching the limits to growth. The health and social costs were increasingly evident, and we are getting to the point where it can't be avoided. I think global capitalism is realizing that the parasitical nature that has emerged, where the top 1% own the vast majority of the world's wealth, can only be sustained for so long, said Buckley. If they kill the host, the bottom 99% of the people, their position in absolute terms is worse off. Even if they own all the wealth, the total pie will shrink, and they are most impacted. So in order to protect their elite position, they will allow changes to make the model more sustainable so that they can remain the top 1%, but sharing a little more to make the model more sustainable. Buckley is more optimistic than most in that he believes the world's financial elites will reorganize the global economy to become sustainable out of self-preservation. Okay. The economics of renewables make this economically sensible. It is not about saving the poor of the world. It is about economic reality. Solar is killing coal-fired power plant investments. Technology and economics win, not environmentalism. Whoa, okay, that's a little bizarre there right at the end. Going into a tailspin of weirdness. Whatever. I don't know how economics wins on a dying planet. Hey guys, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. You can also support the channel at the links below: PayPal, Square, and Patreon. Also, all of my live streams are available for listening on Patreon if you happen to miss them during the day. So you can sign up for my Patreon for as little as $1. If you want to go check out the live streams, they are all there. Thanks a lot.